When women experience these things at work, whether they're having a hot flash, they're looking flushed, or they're tired, they lose power. And both men and women, young and old, actually treat them worse. However, when women called out their symptoms and they said, that's a hot flash, it's menopause, I'm taking care of it, they were able to regain their power. I think that what's important here is being loud about menopause.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. You know, there's a moment in many women's careers when everything is supposed to be cresting. You've put in the years, you've earned real authority, and then something changes. You're not sleeping, you're foggy in meetings where you used to be sharp, you feel off, but you can't quite name why. Today's episode is about menopause, but really, this is an episode about power. Now, I know this topic matters to you because so many of you are right in this window. You're leading teams, you're shaping strategies, you're trying to do your best work. And at the exact same time, you may be navigating a physiological shift that no one prepared you to talk about, much less treat. So, what happens if we stop treating midlife women's health as a private burden that women are supposed to manage on their own, and instead recognize it as infrastructure for leadership? My guest today is Joanna Strober. She is the founder and CEO of Midi Health. You know, Joanna built her company after struggling to get the right care herself and realizing just how many women are being missed by a system that still doesn't start with women's bodies. It is about research and workplace culture. It's about how many women we lose at the exact moment that they should be accelerating. And it's about a radical idea. Women in their 50s, like me, we aren't winding down. In fact, we might be getting started. Here's Joanna Strober. There is this moment when a woman's power in her career kind of peaks. And it's about where I am now. Yeah, I'm 50 this year, give or take. And that coincides with this moment when many women go through a life change that until recently we didn't tend to name out loud. You know, we have all these other words that we use to describe that period in one's life. Maybe you hit a point of burnout, or maybe you hit a point where you're like overwhelmed by the demands of your life. And we very rarely connected the dots to think about how, well, actually, maybe that's a health issue. What happens when we begin to connect those dots?
Your readers all can know about estrogen and how estrogen fluctuations make a huge difference in our bodies. Okay. That hasn't been taken into account in research historically. So I think a lot about SSRIs, anxiety and depression medications, right?
Yes.
Historically, women, when they go in their 40s and they're feeling depressed or anxious, 20% of us are on SSRIs, 20%.
Prescribed during that period?
Yes, correct.
For a set of symptoms?
Yes.
For which my guess is SSRIs are not the only approach to treat?
And really might not be a good approach at all, quite honestly, because it is very hard to come off of them. There's research that shows that, yes, SSRIs can make a difference, but you don't know which one for which person. And none of the medical profession ever said, well, maybe this is related to estrogen. Let's try estrogen first. Yeah. And see if you feel better. And then we won't need to put you on an SSRI that could have really bad side effects and hard to get off of. But the medical system has not looked at us like that. They haven't said, women first, hormones first, let's fix that, and then let's go to other things.
Let's set the foundation for Midi Health. How did you come to start Midi Health? And what do you hope Midi Health unlocks?
So Midi really is a response to my own medical things. It really was a direct relation to what I experienced in the medical system myself. I was 47. I started having panic attacks. I was having marital issues. I was pretty angry all the time. I was not sleeping, gaining weight, all the things.
Half our listeners are nodding right now, right?
I was having all the things.
Sure.
And I went to the doctor, and my primary care suggested a sleep study. I had a sleep study because I wasn't sleeping. They suggested SSRIs, anxiety medication. They told me I should have therapy because I was clearly having some dysregulation and emotionally. and marriage therapy.
Did you run at all of that?
I did. I
Yeah.
ran at it. I wanted to feel better. We went on that entire path, yes.
Yeah.
And so, but nothing was getting better. SSRIs actually were horrible for me personally. I had a bad reaction, got off of them immediately. The sleep study showed I was fine, but yes, I was waking up soaking wet every night at 4 o'clock in the morning. And this is with your readers now, as you said earlier, perimenopause is now in the news.
Right. It's a word that
It
people
was not
say, right?
known. I would go at night and Google these symptoms, and Google didn't say this could be perimenopause and related to your hormones.
Joanna, did you talk about this with your friends?
Not at all.
I wonder a lot about that because that's true for me too. I feel like I'm a woman who was raised to be very comfortable talking about uncomfortable subjects when it came to health. And yet somehow I never found myself talking about this with my female friends.
I was not at all. I was scared. I was scared about my marriage. I was scared about my career.
Yeah.
And I was not talking about it.
Yeah.
So I was told by someone to go to this doctor in San Francisco. And I went to this doctor in San Francisco, and she's in a beautiful neighborhood. It was an hour drive. You sit down, sat in her office, started to cry. She's like, don't worry, we can fix this. And I left with my estrogen patch, prescription, and progesterone to sleep. And I started, and like weeks in, my life was better. It was pretty dramatic change for me.
Right. Did you know right away? Was it a light switch flipping kind of thing?
It was pretty close. Yeah. I mean, I am among those people who was clearly very estrogen depleted.
Yeah.
And so once I had the appropriate patch and medications, my world got very different very rapidly. For me, it was a very rapid change.
Yeah.
And then there was honestly a change of other things. I went to the hairdresser, and he's like, "Oh, your hair is growing. What's going on? Why do you have more hair?" And it was different things. People started telling me my skin looked good. I mean, estrogen is a really big part of our bodies, and having more of it can be a real benefit.
Right.
And so I was very excited that I felt so much better. But I was also pretty angry about the fact that it took so long to get the right care.
Yeah. And by this point, I mean, so 47 was when your symptoms began to present and you noticed it and needed support around it. How old were you when you finally got the estrogen access?
Oh, like a year later, probably around 48.
A year is a very long time when you're not feeling great, right? And then what? What'd you do with the anger?
For a while, I did nothing. I actually started thinking that someone needed to start a menopause company, but this was quite a few years ago, and I couldn't figure out a business model. Yeah. So I started talking all the time to people, and what I saw was initially a few companies had gotten started with subscription services for menopause, and it's pretty clear to me that wasn't going to work. And I had the opportunity. I called some of the entrepreneurs and asked them a bunch of questions, and it wasn't working. Those businesses were not working.
The subscription services were like for the medication? They were actual pill pushers? Okay.
They were actual pill pushers,
right.
And they wanted you to subscribe to a medication, and they wanted you to do that every month and pay them a fee to prescribe every month. And that just didn't feel like a model that would be sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
But then COVID happened,
right?
And the laws changed. And so for me, the big aha moment was when I realized that now I could take the best doctor that I knew and scale them across many states and have insurance coverage for them.
Because suddenly we could see doctors across states via a video interface.
Exactly. That's right. So they had to get licensed in those states, but you could see them in any state as long as we got them licensed there. And then we could get them in network with insurance companies.
So just because you can doesn't mean that something is easy. How much of the early stage of growing Midi was about public perception and starting a conversation versus actually navigating a medical system, which is very complicated?
We started with a pilot, 150 women, recruited all on Facebook, my own personal Facebook, not not a public Facebook.
So this was really like 150 women that you knew or got to through friends of friends.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. I didn't know a lot of them, but they did include my sisters and a lot of my closest friends.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, we're going to take care of you. None of them were getting treatment. None of them. And that was obviously, most of them were eligible. And we started taking care of them. And we had 2 doctors, one internal medicine specialist and one OBGYN.
Right.
And they were collaborating. And that was part of the brilliance of this. Honestly, we didn't know at the time. Was the OBGYN knew some things and the internal medicine knew other things. And they started learning from each other. And so they collaborated on every patient.
Okay.
And so the OBGYN had never dealt with weight loss in her 30-year career.
Wow.
Because weight was something she sent something else to.
Sure.
But weight is a menopause symptom or a midlife health symptom.
Right.
We had them collaborate on every patient.
Right.
And then we wrote care protocols for those patients based on what we were seeing.
Right.
And we learned that we were a sleep doctor, a joint pain doctor, a weight doctor, a anxiety and depression doctor.
Right.
We were the whole thing.
Right. It seems to me that menopause is such a whole system issue for a woman. And that it is also, it doesn't have one presentation. It has as many presentations as women that you know. So that makes it very hard to figure out how to talk about menopause in the context of work and one's career. Because it is simultaneously potentially affecting everything, but kind of hard to narrow it down to specifically impacting anything. In that context, how do companies, employers think about menopause smartly?
So I want to be really careful about this because some of the laws that have been written, for example, around menopause, I actually think are problematic and will lead to more discrimination around women's health. So I want to this is women's health. So we have this word menopause, right? All that menopause means is you haven't had your period for a year. That's what menopause means. You have pre-menopause, perimenopause for 10 to 15 years beforehand. You have post-menopause for the next, until you die.
Right.
So we're really just talking about women's health.
And menopause also is not something that happens exclusively to women in their 40s and 50s. You have early menopause because of all kinds of medical issues. It is.
That's right. You have surgical menopause. There's lots of ways. So I want to be careful when we're talking about menopause. I'm concerned if people think that women in their middle career have some terrible health issue called menopause, which makes them less effective at work, that's bad for all of us.
That's not a good line to take.
Right. It is not good for us. I need to change the conversation that menopause just equals really good women's health care. And we want employers to offer all women really good, women-informed health care.
Okay. And so we also see employers over the last 18 months in particular stepping up to try to offer some benefits and some accommodations to address this more public conversation about menopause that we are having. Now, I use the word menopause there because I think that some of that is incredibly helpful and forward-thinking, and some of that is window dressing. That doesn't actually move us toward anything that supports women in the workplace. And I wonder if you might help us understand the difference.
Yeah, so this is a complicated one, and I will say I find it complicated for the following reasons. HR departments are not trained in evaluating medical care, although we as a society have put them in the position where they are deciding what medical care people get access to.
Yeah.
That's actually not their training. It's not where their expertise is, but they're making these decisions. And most of the decisions they need to make is around cost containment because healthcare costs have gone up so dramatically in our country. Their priority to their employer ends up being around cost reduction.
Right.
So we're putting them in a really weird position, right? To say these HR people are making determinations about what cancer treatments we get, what IVF we get, and then what menopause treatments we get.
Right. Because the constraints are so ludicrous to begin with.
Yeah.
And the constraints are designed to put the business's needs first as business demands.
Right.
And that takes us pretty far off from the human need.
Absolutely. And we shouldn't even be expecting our employers necessarily to be providing our menopause care, right?
No.
Like, but they do because we need them to pay for it.
Yeah.
So what we have done is very different than most companies. So we are in network with insurance companies, but we don't go through employers. What we basically say to employers is tell your employees about their benefits. Most likely, Midi is a benefit they already have. We don't want you to have to pay for us directly. We don't want you to have to choose whether you are paying for us or not. Just let your employees know that we are in your network.
Sure.
What I love for employees, and this is actually really important, is that if you go with Midi, doesn't matter what employer you're at, it's going to be covered. So with a whole lot of health benefits, you're tied to that employer. And if you leave the employer, you lose those benefits.
Yes.
With Midi, that doesn't happen. And so with Midi, no matter where you go, you can still get access to us. And so it's a different model, honestly. We are not relying on employers to choose us. We are working with the payers to get a network with them. And then we just want to make the employers into heroes by offering us.
So we have seen, as Midi has grown, as this conversation has grown in culture, we have seen celebrities flock to it. We're at the point where Michelle Obama will let slip on a podcast that she's in menopause and people won't eye roll. That won't, right? So what does that mean about where we're going in this conversation? And is that a good thing for women?
So I think normalizing the conversation is really good.
Yeah.
I do think that normalizing it is very positive,
Yeah.
especially when you know there's solutions. And I think that part of what happened is if you talked about it and there was no solution, then it's really scary.
Yeah.
If you're not sleeping and you're gaining weight and you don't know that you can actually get sleep, to talk about it just feels very, it feels like you're done, like your career is done. But if you can say, I was having perimenopause and I got on the estrogen patch and now I am doing great and I can take over the world and I have all my energy back.
Right.
That's a very different conversation.
Right. But I would also say, that doesn't mean that that is the right answer for everyone, which brings us back to the more holistic approach to women's health, right? Like the estrogen patch. I mean, I'm married to a woman, and what is the right solution for one of us is totally the wrong solution for the other, right? At what point do we sort of deepen our understanding of women's health in this sort of dimension of our lives and normalize conversation about it within the workplace that doesn't also pathologize it, but instead leaves us feeling empowered and normalizing it is actually a way to move us forward in our careers?
Yeah. So there's a number of things in that question. So first of all, we need more research, right? So we need more research. It's one thing that we need to be doing at Midi because we can now do across this huge population of women.
Yep.
But we need more solutions. Obviously, it's not estrogen for everyone. It's a holistic approach to understand for each of us what works for our own bodies. So Dr. Mindy Goldman, who works for us, is an expert in cancer and survivorship, and women who had cancer, breast cancer, often can't take hormones. So what she explains is that estrogen is like a systemic thing that goes across the whole body.
Yep.
In the event that that doesn't work, then you just go symptom by symptom by symptom. And so if you can't take estrogen for a lot of reasons or it doesn't work for you, then you go, okay, what is the right thing for sleep? It might be a hormone, but it might be a non-hormonal medication. It might be a supplement. There's actually really good research on supplements that you could take ashwagandha and L-theanine, I'm just going to throw that out, that could really help people sleep. So basically what you do is you go symptom by symptom by symptom and you address each individual symptom. And what you need is access to experts who understand women's bodies and who will iterate with you. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Instead, you got to keep testing and trying and figuring out what works best for your body.
I want to go back to we recorded a great conversation last year around this time, March, Women's History Month. But we recorded a great conversation with a couple of women talking about their menopause experiences. And one woman talked about being in the C-suite of a Fortune 500 company in a communications role during the pandemic. And this was pre-2023. This was when she had nothing but fear around hormones and how she stopped sleeping. And eventually it cost her her job. And I'm curious if you have any ability to help us understand how many women we actually may be losing in the workforce right now because they're not getting the health treatment they need during this phase of their life.
I mean, there's research, there's a lot of, surveys that have gone out that say that 1 in 10 women are quitting their jobs because of menopause issues or perimenopause issues. 50% are not applying for a raise or a promotion because of those issues. So it's insidious, right? It's not just that people are quitting, but they're not stepping up in a way that is having a pretty big impact. There's been a lot of surveys. The UK has done more than the US, but these are big surveys that show that there is a very big issue at work on when women are not feeling good. It's hard to step up. It's much easier to step back than step up. The best research that I read was a Harvard Business School study that showed that when women experience these things at work, whether they're having a hot flash or they're looking flushed or they're tired, they lose power. And both men and women, young and old, actually treat them worse because they don't view them as powerful and as impactful. It was not all bad, however. When women called out their symptoms and they said, that's a hot flash, it's menopause, I'm taking care of it, they were able to regain their power. And so I think that what's important here is being loud about menopause. It's why I do what I do on LinkedIn. I think we need to be loud about it. I think that we need to enable women to say, that was a hot flash, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
Instead of, look, I heard a story the other day, actually. It was really interesting. A recruiter was telling me, she was an executive recruiter.
Yeah.
She was interviewing someone for a job, and she'd heard this woman was great. She'd heard this woman was a dynamo. She was interviewing her. And during the interview, the woman was sweaty and looked like she was having a panic attack. She wrote off the candidate completely. No matter all the research she had done that had said that she was a really strong candidate, she didn't even present her to the employer.
Yeah.
And now she realizes that she was having a hot flash.
Yeah.
And what if that woman had said during the interview, I just want you to know I'm having a hot flash. This is normal for me. I'm a superstar. This will go away. But instead, that the lack of conversation left them both uncomfortable. The woman obviously stumbled because she was having a hot flash and didn't know how to address it.
Right.
The recruiter felt like she was looking at someone who didn't look confident. And so that's what I think I'm optimistic about, is that we can change that dialogue.
It's a pairing in some ways of the mainstream understanding that the symptoms connected to perimenopause and menopause are treatable and not problematic at all. And in fact, once treated, can become a sort of engine, a superpower. And then it's fine to name them, right?
I think that's right.
Having hot flash here. I'll be with you in 1 minute.
That is exactly right, right? Just say that. I'm having a hot flash. I'm doing great. I'm going to be back to you.
Now that you have been such an outspoken person on this topic for a number of years, you also have to be in a position where a lot of people bring you their stories. Do you find that wherever you go, people are like, well, let me tell you?
Yes. Yes. Recently, it's been a lot of men coming and saying that Midi saved their marriage.
Really?
Yes, that's been the most fun. All the time, men are coming up and hugging me and saying thank you and telling me that I saved their marriage.
It is alarming to think that so much of the shift that happens in our 40s and 50s is actually a shift that can be addressed through really basic health.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so if you had a magic wand and you could change 2 things about the current work environment, what would those 2 things be? So
I'm a really big believer that women are awesome at work. I know that sounds pat, but I really am a huge believer in it. And I know so many women who have just thrived throughout their careers, and I want to shine a bigger light on those women. And I think a lot of times the press talks about the women who are not failing at work, who are failing at work, and instead of just really spotlighting how many women are thriving at work. And I think understanding that will beget more success and more acceptance of the fact that, honestly, after your kids leave the household, you can accomplish anything. I can tell you that as someone whose kids are now gone. The energy you have when your children have left and all that time you poured into them, now you can pour into other things. Women in their 50s can be amazing at work because they don't have all these other obligations anymore. Right. So I think that workplaces should really lean into older I don't know if 50 is older, but us older ladies, because we can be dynamos at work. And I think that a lot of times we just prioritize young people. And I think it's really important to realize that ageism is misplaced.
I love that that you're surfacing that. I remember I have a very good friend, Diane Brady, a journalist, who got to a place in her life where she sent the last of her 3 children off to college. Her husband had passed away of cancer several years earlier, and she found herself in the middle of her 50s with all this time, and all she wanted to do was throw it into the ambition that comes with finally being able to say yes to every business trip and taking that to employers and having them be like, well, I mean, do you want to work that hard right now? And not accepting her, yes, I do. I want to work that hard right now. I think we sometimes miss that about this stage of life.
I think that's right. And I think, honestly, older women are awesome.
Yeah.
They have so much energy. They know how to get things done.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great time to thrive in your workplace.
Okay, so that is one of the 2 things that you could shift in the workplace as it exists right now. Is there another thing?
We've done a good job in the workplace of normalizing mental health. And I think we need to do just as good of a job normalizing women's midlife health. And in the workplace, it really has become very standard for people to talk about getting therapy and that it's not stigmatizing. And in many ways, menopause is behind mental health, but we're going to get there. And I would love to make it that same normalization as we've seen in mental health and the same just standardization. You have an issue, you're able to fix it, and then you can thrive.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important change that we can make.
That was Joanna Strober, co-founder and CEO of Midi Health. Check it out. And I just want to say, this episode meant a lot to me personally. I have followed this company and Joanna's work for years, and I think it really matters. Now, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you right back here next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmadbegi and Adam Yates. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gidron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.